Hey, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. This is the Nathan Mackey podcast, and today we have a great friend of mine, Mr. Jerry Gunter, who resides just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. Jerry is a Pitts S1 pilot and owner, and I've had the privilege of knowing Jerry for a very, very long time. And Jerry's recovering from a recent hip surgery and agreed to be on the podcast with me. Jerry, how are you today?
Doing well, thank you.
Well, great. And how's your hip doing?
Well, it's doing pretty good. It's not protesting too much, but yeah, when you've been operated on with a hammer and a saw, things have got to be a little tender.
Sure. Well, I sent you a list of questions there. Do you have them in front of you?
Not yet,
Okay. Well, I will go ahead and we'll
but
talk about it. Now, you grew up in a very famous town um, that a lot of us who watched reruns of the Andy Griffith Show know of. You grew up in the original Mayberry. Tell us about growing up in the town of Mount Airy, North Carolina, if you would.
well, it's a farm community mostly, and my oldest brother went to school with Andy Griffith, and uh, Mount Airy is basically what Andy used for a lot of his premise on the show with, although he said that Mount Airy and Mayberry had nothing in common because Mayberry could solve all of its problems in 30 minutes.
Hmm.
But he finally admitted that he did use a lot of Mount Airy as his inspiration, and a lot of the people he used their actual names. Uh,
Wow.
when I was growing up, the sheriff's name was Jim Taylor, not Andy Taylor.
Interesting. Hmm. No, what was there? A deputy named Barney.
No,
No.
but my cousin was one of the deputies up there, and he got really angry when they started referring to him as Barney after the show started.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Now tell me, you and I have the same love of aviation. Tell me about how you got into aviation, Jerry.
Well, when I was 6 months old, my oldest brother put me on the front seat of a J3 and took me flying.
Hmm.
It's sort of I've been in airplanes more or less ever since.
Well, great.
I learned to fly at the Mount Airy Airport,
Hmm.
and uh, I had my pilot's license before I had my driver's license, and I had a great time uh, with my youth there on the airport when I wasn't having to work on the farm and or drive a school bus or many of the other things I ended up
Hmm.
doing. And the uh, the people at the airport were an inspiration to me, and it was a very good time to be able to be there and live and learn to fly. I worked for flying lessons, not money.
Yep. Been there, done that.
Yep. And the man who taught me how to fly was a man named Dave McGavick,
Hmm.
and he was a very good instructor because he told me he was going to teach me to fly an airplane. I wasn't going to be no airplane driver.
Hmm.
So I started out with
Hmm.
uh, aerobatics and everything else that came along with it. He taught me to fly like I was in the military
Right.
and use the same language.
Hmm. Hey. Well, I imagine that was a colorful way to learn how to fly.
Yes, it was, but
Yeah.
it was well ingrained in me. I, I had a lot of skill built up by the time I was 19 years old that most people don't get to go through. So
Mhm.
I'm very proud of that, having been taught to fly by him.
Wonderful. Well, you told me about a really interesting thing, that there was a cable car that was um, strung between two mountains in the north or the Western Carolina mountains, and you were
It,
flying a Super Cub one day. Tell us about that.
well, this cable car stretched between the Blue Ridge Parkway and a nearby mountain peak.
Mhm.
And at its highest point, it was right at 800 feet from the cable to the ground, which at the time it was the highest unsupported cable car in the world.
Mhm.
And you could get a ride on the cable car, and it would take you over to a restaurant and shops and things like that.
Mhm.
But I was coming back from Virginia one day in a Super Cub, and I zipped over the mountain peak there. I was flying fairly low level,
Mhm.
and I saw the cable car, and so there was that big old distance between the cable and the ground. So I just looped over it and then went on down the valley.
You
They
looped up.
had
You
three.
looped over it.
Yeah, I looped over it, and um, there was three phone calls before I landed. So, so I got a little bit of a chastising over that, and being that I was a student pilot at the time, they raked me over the coals and then told me don't do it again.
Sure. Now
But it
you.
was fun.
Oh, sure. I can't imagine. I also can't imagine being a passenger in that cable car either, and seeing this Super Cub loop over the car. That would have been something. I would. I think that probably they had a more exciting trip than you did.
Well, for me, it was just normal times for a
Yeah.
15-year-old.
And these days you couldn't get away with that. You would probably have much uh, more of a stiffer penalty on you today. Yeah.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
I would have probably been uh, had my license pulled for at least probably 3 to 6 months, and
Hmm.
anything else they decided they wanted to come up with.
Sure. Those were the days, weren't they, Jerry?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
fun days.
Now you transitioned to the U.S. Air Force. Tell us a little bit about that experience going into the Air Force.
Well, I started out going into the Air National Guard as a C-130 loadmaster,
Hmm.
and they decided to put me on active duty to go through all my training, which put me on active duty for over a year.
Hmm.
And so I was at Little Rock Air Force Base, Shepherd Air Force Base, uh, training and flying for that period of time. And then I spent 4 years as a C-130 loadmaster, and then came along an Army general that we were hauling around, and
Hmm.
we were talking aircraft in the back, and that's how I got talked into transitioning from the Air Force / Air Guard to the Army,
Hmm.
and I went in as a OH-58 um, Aero Scout observer was
Hmm.
my official title,
Okay.
and so I spent 6 years doing that.
Wow. Now, what was that like being an aero observer?
It was very interesting. My flying position was left seat,
Uh-huh.
and it was my job to be able to pick out uh, people, equipment, and anything else at right in the treetop level, doing 95 to 100 knots.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
I had to learn how to look at everything at a glance and sort of take mental photographs of everything.
Sure.
And it was very challenging, and I loved it.
I'm sure. Did you have any interesting stories flying the Kiowa?
Well, one night we were flying some sorties, and we were six helicopter formation, and it was around midnight. We were supposed to go into a place for what we called a hot refuel.
Hmm.
You land, and then three helicopters at a time, we were supposed to hover over and sit down next to a tanker, and while we were sitting there running wide open, they would come out and top off the helicopter. Well, we were lining up downwind for this large grass strip it was called Goldberg Farp, forward air refueling point. and we were lining up for that. And somewhere along the way, lead got disoriented and fell out of the formation, went to the back of the line, which suddenly we were lead. So we went in, turned base, turned final, and turned on the landing light because they were supposed to lay some lights pointing down the clearing. Much to my dismay, it was laid across the clearing. So we were the first ones to find that out. And as we turned on the landing light, all we saw was a tree trunk.
Oh my goodness.
And
wow.
then we cut it. Then we proceeded to cut a tree in half and fall out the other side.
That's quite a way to cut down a tree, Jerry. I would expect nothing
It
less
is
from you.
it's the most expensive way to cut a tree. And it was interesting though. The windshield and chin bubble collapsed all the way up to our feet. A limb came through and
wow.
went basically went right between us and got wedged. And we had all kinds of warnings come on, and I was just sitting there thinking, oh, great. I'm going to make it through this one and die in the next tree, but there wasn't one next tree, thank
wow.
goodness. We hit the ground and jumped out and ran.
That's quite a story. Now OH-58, that's a variant of what?
Bell Jet Ranger is a civilian aircraft.
Uh-huh.
And the OH-58 started out with the A and B, then the C, then the D model.
Mm-hmm.
The A and B was what I was in.
Mm-hmm.
And the C and D, they were remodeled into those as time went on.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it was changing horsepower, and the D models were put back out more like the Bell, 409? It's the four-bladed main rotor.
Yes, or something like that.
By the time they finished out and retired the OH-58, it was the four-bladed main rotor.
And it was
But I never got into those.
Go ahead.
I never got into those, though.
It was probably a much nicer aircraft, too.
Oh, yeah, the ones we were in were about as
austere.
Austere and picked bone clean as you could keep them.
Mm-hmm. What did you like most?
But they were fun.
What did you like most about flying the OH-58?
You didn't need an airport.
Didn't need an airport.
You could sit down anywhere.
Wow.
And that included restaurants or wherever you wanted to stop and eat.
Now, did you have any restrictions as far as? I mean, I imagine that caused quite a stir if you just show up in an OH-58 to the nearest Hardee's or wherever.
Well, actually, it was a McDonald's, but it did stir up some people when we landed there once and picked up some food for our ground crews.
Could you get it in the drive-through?
No, I had to get them to bring it out.
Oh wow!
But we did sit down as close as we could get to the building, though, which disturbed a lot of people in the building. But when you got a green machine and you got it wearing a green outfit, you can sort of get by with stuff.
Sure. Now you and I had an interesting meeting. Do you remember how we met?
Wasn't it on the show?
The TV show, yes, sir. We did the TV show together for a number of years, the Carolinas
Yep.
Aviation Television Show, and you and I were camera operators most of the time. We had a lot of fun doing that.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. I miss those days.
Yeah, we wish that we could go back and do that same stuff today. We had a lot of fun times, and we had a rather height challenged one of our other camera operators. I remember there was a funny
moment. You talking about Charlene?
Yes, there was a very funny moment when Charlene ran across the shot to get to another camera, I believe. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, she wasn't quite 5 feet tall.
Uh-huh.
And I think soaking wet, she said she weighed 98 pounds.
Uh-huh.
But she was a hoot.
Yeah, she was a lot of fun. I remember I remember she ran across the shot, and I hear in the intercom you said, "Who was that little boy?"
Yeah, she kept her hair cut very short.
Yeah,
We made fun of her over
yeah. Well,
that.
we love Charlene. We're not making fun of her. It's just a fun memory that we had, and with Brad
Yep.
Stafford from Channel 3 and the old TV radio professional Dale Michael Brisson was on the show with us too, and I got to be a guest several times, and my friend Roger Crenson, I've got a picture here. You probably can't see it, of course, but got a picture here of us setting up for the TV show. Now, one of my favorite stories that you tell is about a landing you made in a Piper Aztec. Tell me about that, Jerry.
uh, Dwight Cross on the Aztec, and it was Dwight Cross, Buddy Morgan, and myself. We took off and went flying around in Dwight's Aztec,
Mhm.
and we landed, and Dwight decided he'd go back out one more time.
Mhm.
So we turned around and took off, and as we crossed off the end of the runway climbing out, I was looking at one of my neighbor's satellite dishes and happened to notice white smoke coming out from under the left engine.
Oh my goodness.
So I told Dwight, I said, I see smoke, and he said, okay, and he made an immediate turn back downwind,
Mhm.
and we left the gear down,
Mhm.
and we kept looking. None of the pressures changed, no hydraulic pressures, nothing. But we figured it had to be hydraulic since the smoke was white.
Mhm.
And as we turned from downwind to base toward the runway, the left engine went from white smoke to a big orange fireball.
Mm.
At that point, the smoke turned black and filled the cockpit.
Oh my.
I was trying to put my feet over the vents in the floor to keep it from coming in, but that didn't help at all.
Mhm.
And Dwight said he guessed where the runway was, and he shut down and feathered both engines at the same time.
Mhm.
And we sat down. The airplane collapsed, and then we started sliding. We thought the gear had collapsed, but what happened was the wing came off.
Oh wow. Mm.
And so we were sliding down the runway, and so we took what fuel was in that wing that departed and scattered it down the runway. So we managed to set fire to a little over 3,000 feet of runway, as well as burn down the airplane.
Wow. Now, what was left of the airplane when you finished, or when it
Um,
finished burning, rather?
part of part of the right wing and the nose.
Mhm.
The rest of the airplane was pretty much melted or semi-melted.
Mhm. Mm. Wow. Well, God certainly was looking out for you, wasn't he?
Yes, he was, and
Mm.
I've always told people most of my life I've kept my guardian angel on overtime.
Mhm. Tell us about the Pitts S1 that you have.
Yes, I've been a partner in it and owning it a total now of about 31 years.
Okay.
And I started out as a partner with a guy named Gordon Graves. We called him Gordy,
Mhm.
and we were partners together for a few years, and then I bought him out, and I've had it for me ever since. And today, though, I'm having to force myself to look for someone else to own it because I'm getting to the point where, with my hip replacement and all this other stuff, I cannot get in it.
Sure. I
So, but that airplane's been so much fun for me, and it's been a member of the family for 31 years now.
I can imagine. Now
I don't know
you
if anybody else is. I don't know if anybody else has owned a pits that long. Do you?
I don't know. Maybe Curtis. Maybe Curtis Pitts owned one that long. But
Could be.
yeah. I assumed that he flew the Pitts since he designed it, but I didn't know him like
Uh,
you did.
well, he did fly a lot of them.
Mhm.
He was he was an amazing man.
Mhm.
He knew where every last one of his pits were and who owned them.
Wow. No,
That was just absolutely stunning.
no, you correct me if I'm wrong, but you used to do air shows over Carowinds, right? The amusement park?
No,
Okay, no.
No, that was Dwight.
Okay. Well, tell me about
Uh,
that anyway, 'cause they did something interesting with those two planes.
yeah, Dwight and Lindsay Hess,
Mhm.
and um, there was one of the pits involved. But what they did was nobody seemed to notice, but every day for several years,
Mhm.
two pits would do formation aerobatics over Carowinds as part of the entertainment.
Wow.
But what people didn't know was those two aircraft were tied together with 20 feet of nylon rope,
Wow.
and it wasn't designed to break loose if anything went wrong.
Hmm. Wow.
They took off, flew the show, and went back and landed tied together.
Mhm. Wow. Mm. Now you told me a story about you were listening to a radio transmission of a helicopter pilot. I forget if it was a Huey or what it was, and you said the tower called and asked him if he was okay while he was having some mechanical issues.
It was a Cobra, and they were doing auto rotations.
Mhm.
And something happened to one of the auto rotations, and the Cobra spun around and almost hit the tail rotor, but it spun around and was sliding down the grass. And
Mhm.
the controller asked them if they needed help, and the pilot came back with "Don't know, not through crashing."
Mhm.
So,
Now you've been to Oshkosh quite a few times, and you got to know a very important person that was at the campground with you, and your friend came up one day to tell you that he'd met somebody really, really important, and he wanted you to know that because he was real proud of himself for getting to know that person. Can you tell me that story?
well, that person was Paul Poberezny,
Mhm.
and we happened to be parked next to them in their motorhome. They were down next to the flight line, and so was I and my wife Libby. And we got acquainted with him. And Paul is a very friendly man. Once you knew Paul, he was your friend for the rest of your life and his life.
Mhm.
He never he would always, if he spotted you somewhere, no matter where, he would come to you and talk to you and remember. But anyhow, we spent a few days together right there next to each other's motorhomes.
Mhm.
And my friend Bill, he came over and he said, "I just been down to the theater in the woods, and I saw him, got to talk to him and everything." And I said, "That's really great." And I turned around and hollered, "Paul, can you come here a minute?" And he come around the corner and said, "What?" And Bill looked at me and said, "You know how to ruin someone's day."
Yeah. I got the chance to meet Paul back in 2004, and he was really a neat guy and always had time for folks and folks who wanted to take a picture. And he used to drive around in that Volkswagen Beetle called Red One, and
Yes,
just was synonymous, of course, with the Experimental Aircraft Association. Really built it into what it is today because of his
yes, he did.
passion. Yeah. So I know you're not.
And
Go ahead.
I started to say, and we just lost Audrey this week.
Yeah, that's true. I did see that in
His
one.
wife Audrey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I I had an interesting situation happen to me when I was in Oshkosh one year. It was a Sunday morning, and there was a front coming through, and there was a tornado watch out. And I was watching the radar in one of the buildings, and I happened to have a NASA hat on, and I must have looked pretty important because they didn't say anything to me walking in this EAA official maintenance building, and I just stood there, and they had a tornado warning, and so I was like, well, I don't know where to go. I don't know if I should stay in this building or go somewhere else, and I kind of ran around for about 2 or 3 minutes, and I found this house, and so the garage was open, and I just went in, and there was this little um, Beetle in there without a top on it. I just sat in the Beetle, and there was a door open, and I realized that the door was open to the basement of this house, and I thought, man, that's interesting. If the weather gets really crazy, I'm gonna go down into the basement. I don't care who's down there, but I'm not going to sit down there. And I realized after a few minutes and after the tornado warning had expired that I was sitting in Paul Poberezny's Red One Beetle, and I was sitting in Paul Poberezny's garage, and he and his wife and family were sitting down in the basement because of the tornado warning. So I could have gotten to know Paul and Audrey really well that day if the tornado had come through.
Indeed.
Now, you had an interesting experience with a tornado when you were an airman at, was it Shepherd Air Force Base?
Yes, I was going through ground school at Shepherd Air Force Base,
Now tell me about what
and
happened. Go ahead.
we had a tornado come through the area, and it literally wiped out half the base.
Mhm.
But they told us to go back to the barracks and pull the mattress off of our bunks, and then go in the hall of the barracks and put the mattress over us.
Mhm.
Uh, I happened to be housed in the last wooden barracks on the base, but they hadn't been torn down yet.
Mhm.
So I said, I'm not doing that. I went outside, and there was a pretty deep ditch right there with about a 5-foot culvert under it.
Mhm.
And I went down there and I stood in the ditch and watched the tornado go by. And that way, if I needed to, I could step into the culvert.
Wow. Mm. Mm. No thanks. I'm good. Now, you fly your pits out of a little grass strip north of Charlotte. Tell me about how you found that airstrip and how long you've been there.
uh, I found it uh, back in about 1985. And I started out with an airplane called a Flybaby there. And
Mhm.
I kept the Flybaby there for 13 years.
Mhm.
And then as that went on, that's when I got into the pits.
Mhm.
And so for a number of years there, I had the pits and a Flybaby. Then I sold the Flybaby to a neighbor,
Mhm.
and but I've been there since 1985, and also as time went on, I managed to find 4 acres next to the runway, and so I bought that and put a house on it,
Wow.
and I've been here for uh, coming up on 32 years here in this house next to the airport.
Wow. Mm. And you've got a little hangar out there with your pits in there, and correct me if I'm wrong, but you're looking to sell the pits, is that right?
Yes, I am.
Yeah.
Like
And
I said, it needs a younger guy.
you've just done almost a completely, well, a refurbishment on the aircraft and put some extra avionics in it that weren't there before, didn't you?
Yes, I did. I stripped the airplane down, went through it. Um, I built a brand new instrument panel and installed a Garmin G5 and a mount for an iPad and the engine instruments. But that Garmin G5 replaced all the other instruments in the airplane.
Mm-hmm.
So I have the Garmin is the airspeed, the altimeter, the turn and bank, the VSI. It does all kinds of things, and it's all right there on one screen. Plus, it's full 360-degree artificial horizon.
Wow. Wow. Now, what airplane do you hope to replace the pits with?
My hope is to find a Cherokee 140, something I can get in and out of with a door, and I just want to ride around and enjoy the view.
Mm-hmm.
If anybody has never flown in a pits, uh, the thing is, if you look, the radio is between my feet.
Mm-hmm.
I look down to change radio frequencies, and when I look back up, the airplane is never where I left it.
Hmm.
So I'm looking forward to being able to change radio frequencies without it being an aerobatic maneuver.
Sure, sure. What's the secret to successfully and safely flying a pits?
Well, I've told people along as advice for a pits, respect it and be scared of it for at least the first year you own it.
Mm-hmm.
And then once you get used to it, keep respect for it, but always ignore what it's doing, watch where it's going.
Mhm.
Two different things. That airplane you get on final, you're trying to land, and it'll start trying to go sideways. It'll try, and then as you come in, it'll try to skip and hop and turn around and do things like that. It just concentrate on keeping the nose pointed straight down the runway and
Mhm.
focus on that. It'll eventually quit doing the other stuff, and then you can stop the airplane.
Mhm.
But concentrate on keeping it going straight and ignore some of the other things, because if you take your attention off of where it's going, then it's going to go somewhere else, and
Mhm.
do it very quickly.
Mhm. As a friend of mine used to say, keep one or two mistakes ahead of the airplane.
Exactly.
Yeah. And if somebody's interested in looking at your pits or anything, is there a way to get in touch with you to talk about your pits? Now I know that you have some provisions. You want someone who is proficient in tail wheels, and you
Yes.
want to know that they can basically fly the airplane away, that they're not going to be a danger to themselves or someone else flying that airplane away. So it's very much not a novice aircraft. Very much, and
No,
it can be dangerous in the wrong hands, really. And so
yes,
you
that airplane can kill people faster than you can blink if you're not keeping up with it.
right. And so you're wanting someone that has a lot of experience with tail wheels and maybe even a pits or something akin to the pits as well.
Yes.
Yeah. And how would someone go about contacting you if they're interested in the pits?
Um, if they want to email me, I'll do that because I'd rather keep my phone number kind of private.
Sure.
But
Absolutely.
if if they want to email me, it's cltpits
Mm-hmm.
at bellsouth.net.
Mm-hmm. Say it one more time for me.
cltpits at bellsouth.net.
CLTpits at bellsouth.net. Okay. All right. Thanks for giving me that again. Well, Jerry, it's been a great pleasure to interview you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me today and being my first guest on the podcast. You and I have been friends for, oh goodness, 15 years or more at least, and
Yes.
and look forward to many happy years of friendship with you and Miss Libby. And thanks so much for taking the time to talk with me today, Jerry.
Well, thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
You're welcome. Well, see you later, and thank you so much for joining me for the first edition of the Nathan Mackey podcast, where we talk about faith, flying, friendship, and so much more. Have a great afternoon, morning, or evening, wherever you are. Bye now.